The slave market buzzed with the low hum of alien chatter and the sharp cries of auctioneers. Clad in a plain jacket that had seen better days, Donovan blended into the crowd, his eyes scanning the cages without betraying the disgust churning in his gut. He hated this. Every fiber of his being screamed to leave, but orders were orders. His employer demanded a laborer, and he was here to make a purchase. Still, he couldn't stop his hand from twitching toward the blaster at his side every time a whip cracked or a muffled sob reached his ears. He walked past a row of cages filled with the broken and the hopeless, slaves who had long stopped fighting. Their fate. That was when he saw her. At first, it was her defiant posture that caught his eye. While others cowered, she stood tall, her chin lifted as if daring anyone to look at her directly. Her skin shimmered faintly under the harsh artificial light, a light purple hue so vibrant it seemed otherworldly, even in this den of aliens. Her silvery hair fell in soft waves over her shoulders, and her eyes, bright gold and fierce, locked onto his. For a moment, he froze. She wasn't just stunning. She was radiant in a way that seemed to challenge the entire concept of captivity. The auctioneer's voice cut through his reverie. Lot 74. A rare specimen, strong and unbroken. Starting bid. 5,000 credits, Donovan heard himself say before he could think it through. The crowd murmured, some turning to size him up. He felt her eyes on him, sharp and piercing, as if trying to dissect his intentions. The auctioneer grinned, sensing a quick sale. 5,000. Do I hear 6? A squat alien with tusks raised, a paddle sneering in Donovan's direction. 6,000! Donovan's jaw tightened. He wasn't walking away without her. 7, 8, 10. The crowd quieted. 10,000 credits was no small sum, even in a place like this. The tusked alien hesitated, his tiny eyes darting between Donovan and the woman. Finally, he lowered his paddle with a growl. Sold! To the human in the back! Donovan stepped forward, his pulse pounding as the auctioneer unlocked the cage. She stepped out gracefully, her gaze never leaving his. Up close, her presence was even more striking, though her arms were bound with metallic restraints that pulsed faintly with an anti-energy field. She didn't flinch as the auctioneer handed him the control module for the restraints, but her eyes narrowed. You made a mistake, she said, her voice low and steady, laced with an accent that rolled off her tongue like a melody. Donovan raised an eyebrow, leading her away from the cages. That's gratitude for you. Most people start with thank you when someone spends 10 grand on them. I'm not most people, she shot back. And if you think I'm going to grovel at your feet, you're even dumber than you look. He bit back a grin. Good thing I don't need you to grovel. Just stay quiet until we're off this rock, and we'll call it even. She didn't reply, but the intensity of her stare made it clear she wasn't done with him. As they wove through the market, Donovan felt the weight of eyes following them. Slavers didn't trust humans, and he'd just spent a small fortune on a high-profile purchase. It wouldn't take long for someone to start asking questions. The ship came into view, a sleek but battered freighter that had seen its share of trouble. Donovan hit the ramp controls, ushering her inside. As the hatch sealed, he let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. Okay, he said, turning to face her. Ground rules. 1, I'm not your master. 2, you're not staying in those restraints any longer than necessary. And 3, don't touch anything without asking. Her golden eyes narrowed. What do you want from me? He hesitated. Honesty wasn't going to win him any favors, but lying wouldn't help either. I want you to be free, that's it. She stared at him, unblinking, before letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. Do you think I'm stupid? No one buys a slave to set them free. Maybe I'm the first. He stepped closer, holding up the control module for the restraints. With a press of a button, the metallic cuffs unlocked and fell to the floor with a heavy clang. She stared at her wrists in disbelief, rubbing the faint indents left by the bindings. Why? She asked, her voice softer now, almost vulnerable. "Because this," he gestured to her wrists, "is wrong. No one deserves it. Not you, not anyone." For the first time, her expression faltered. The defiance in her eyes dimmed, replaced by something far more complicated. Before she could respond, the ship's console beeped, signaling an incoming transmission. Donovan moved to the cockpit, muttering under his breath, "This day just keeps getting better." She followed, keeping her distance but watching him closely. As the holographic display lit up, a grizzled alien face appeared, one of the market overseers. "Human," the overseer growled. "You've bought something that doesn't belong to you. Return her, and we won't hunt you down." Donovan smirked, leaning back in the pilot's seat. "Sorry, must have missed the part where she came with a warranty. She's mine now, fair and square." The overseer's eyes glinted dangerously. "You'll regret this." The transmission cut off. Donovan sighed, setting the ship's coordinates for hyperspace. "Well, that's going to be a problem." "You just made yourself a target," she said, her voice steady despite the tension in the air. He glanced at her, a half smile tugging at his lips. "Guess I have a habit of making bad decisions. But don't worry, I'm good at surviving them." Her lips twitched as if suppressing a smile, but she turned away, her posture guarded once more. As the ship jumped to hyperspace, Donovan couldn't help but wonder what he'd just gotten himself into. The hum of the ship's engines filled the silence between them, an unspoken tension hanging in the air. Donovan stole a glance at her as she stood near the viewport, arms crossed, her golden eyes scanning the star-speckled void outside. Her profile was sharp and elegant, her defiance still evident in every line of her posture. She hadn't said a word since the market overseer's threat, and it was starting to get under his skin. "You're quiet," he said, breaking the silence. "Not planning to kill me in my sleep, are you?" She didn't look at him, but a faint smile played on her lips. "If I were, I wouldn't tell you." "Fair enough," he replied, leaning back in the pilot's chair. "Still, it's a bit rude, don't you think? I did just save you from a lifetime of misery." She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "Saved me? You bought me." Donovan winced. "Technically true, but context matters." "Does it?" She stepped closer, her gaze sharp. "You walked into that market and paid to own me. How is that any different from the others?" "Because I'm not keeping you," he shot back, standing to meet her gaze. "You think I wanted to be there? You think I enjoy being part of that system? I had to play along to get you out of it." "Convenient excuse," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Look, I get it. You don't trust me, and I don't blame you. But I'm not your enemy. I'm trying to help you." She studied him for a long moment, her golden eyes searching his face for any sign of deceit. Finally she spoke, her tone softer but no less firm. "If you're telling the truth, then prove it. Take me somewhere safe and let me go." "That's the plan," Donovan said, his voice steady. "But safe isn't exactly easy to come by right now. That overseer back there, he's not going to let this go. They'll send bounty hunters, maybe worse. We've got to stay ahead of them." "And what's in it for you?" she asked, crossing her arms. He hesitated, then shrugged. "Call it guilt. Humanity's done enough damage out here. I'm just trying to balance the scales, one small act at a time." Her expression softened, though she quickly masked it. "What's your name?" "Donovan. And you?" She hesitated, then said, "Kayla." Kayla, he repeated, testing the sound of it. Nice to meet you. Officially, I mean. She rolled her eyes but didn't reply, turning back to the viewport. Donovan decided to let the conversation drop. They had a long journey ahead, and he didn't want to push her too far too soon. Hours passed in relative silence, broken only by the occasional beeping of the ship's console. Donovan busied himself with routine checks, while Kayla kept to herself, her gaze fixed on the stars. It wasn't until a sharp alarm blared through the cockpit that their uneasy truce was interrupted. "What now?" Donovan muttered, moving quickly to the controls. His stomach sank as he saw the readings on the screen. "Great. Looks like we've got company." Kayla stepped closer, her expression serious. "Bounty hunters?" "Looks like it," he said grimly, watching as a small but fast ship appeared on their radar. "They must have tracked us from the market. Hold on, it's about to get bumpy." He slammed a hand on the throttle, sending the ship into a steep dive. The pursuing vessel fired, bright streaks of plasma lighting up the darkness. Kayla grabbed onto a nearby console for balance, her expression a mix of fear and determination. "Do you have weapons on this thing?" she shouted over the noise. "Nothing that'll match theirs," Donovan replied, weaving through a dense asteroid field. "In an attempt to shake their pursuers, we're going to have to outmaneuver them." "Great," she muttered, bracing herself as the ship lurched to the side. "So your plan is to not die. Solid strategy." "Got a better one?" he shot back, a grin tugging at his lips despite the danger. She didn't answer, but Donovan glanced at the display, his grin widening. "Now you're thinking. Hang on." He pushed the ship to its limits, diving into the passage with barely enough room to spare. The walls of the asteroid loomed close on either side, but Donovan's reflexes kept them from colliding. Behind them, the pursuing ship wasn't as lucky. A sharp turn sent it careening into the rock, and it exploded in a brilliant flash of light. Kayla let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding, her grip on the console relaxing. "You actually did it." "Of course I did," Donovan said, his tone smug. "I'm Donovan. Surviving bad situations is kind of my thing." She gave him a sidelong glance, her lips twitching into the faintest hint of a smile. "Don't let it go to your head." "Too late," he replied, flashing her a grin. For the first time since they'd met, Kayla allowed herself a small laugh. It was brief, almost reluctant, but it was enough to ease some of the tension between them. Donovan didn't say anything, but he felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, he was starting to win her trust. The debris field was still visible on the ship's scanners as Donovan guided them back into open space. The near miss had left him with a fine layer of sweat on his brow, but his hands were steady on the controls. Kayla leaned back in the co-pilot's chair, her golden eyes fixed on him with a mix of curiosity and something he couldn't quite place. She seemed calmer now, though her guard was still up. "So," she said after a long silence, "what's the next part of your brilliant plan?" "Find a safe port, lay low, and figure out how to keep the galaxy's scum off our trail," Donovan said, leaning back in his chair with a weary sigh. "I know a guy who might help. Not exactly trustworthy, but he owes me a favor." Kayla raised an eyebrow. "Sounds promising." "Oh, it's not," he said with a grin. "But when you're running from slavers and bounty hunters, you don't get to be picky." She studied him for a moment, her expression softening just slightly. "Why are you really doing this?" Donovan frowned. "Didn't we already cover this? Guilt, conscience, balancing the scales, all that noble-sounding stuff?" "I don't buy it," she said, her tone steady. "You could have walked away." "No one forced you to bid for me. So why? Really?" He hesitated, leaning forward and resting his elbows on the console. "You ever look around and think, this is wrong, all of it? The way people treat each other, the way systems grind everyone." "Down," he shook his head. "I'm not a saint, Kayla. I've done my share of surviving at other people's expense. But when I saw you standing there, I couldn't just walk away. Her eyes softened, the golden hue catching the light, in a way that made his heart skip a beat. She looked like she wanted to say something but stopped herself, her lips pressing into a thin line. Finally, she nodded. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You're welcome," he replied, just as softly. The moment hung between them, delicate and unspoken, until the ship's console let out a sharp beep. Donovan leaned forward, scanning the readout. "Looks like we've got a potential stop," he said, bringing up a map of the sector. "There's a station nearby, neutral territory, no questions asked. It's not luxurious, but it should be safe enough for now." Kayla frowned. "Neutral territory? Sounds too good to be true." "It usually is," Donovan admitted, setting the course. "But beggars can't be choosers. We'll be in and out before anyone notices us." The station came into view a few hours later, a sprawling, haphazard structure that looked like it had been pieced together from spare parts and duct tape. Ships of all shapes and sizes orbited around it, a chaotic mix of traders, smugglers, and mercenaries. Donovan docked the freighter without incident, though he kept a wary eye on the scanner for any signs of trouble. They disembarked into the bustling corridors, the air thick with the smell of grease and too many bodies crammed into too small a space. Kayla stayed close, her posture tense, but composed. Her beauty drew more than a few stares, but her fierce glare quickly discouraged anyone from getting too close. "Stay sharp," Donovan said under his breath. "This place has its own rules, and none of them work in our favor." "Great," she muttered. "Sounds like my kind of place." They made their way to a dimly lit cantina tucked into the station's lower levels. The air was thick with smoke and the hum of conversation, punctuated by the occasional bark of laughter or clatter of glasses. Donovan scanned the room, his eyes landing on a wiry figure hunched over a table in the corner. "There he is," Donovan said, gesturing for Kayla to follow. The man looked up as they approached, his face splitting into a crooked grin. "Donovan, you scoundrel! Still alive, I see. Didn't think you had it in you. Nice to see you." "Too, Corin," Donovan said, sliding into the seat across from him. "I need a favor." Corin raised an eyebrow, his gaze shifting to Kayla. "And who's this? Don't tell me you've gone respectable and settled down." Kayla crossed her arms, her golden eyes narrowing. "I'm not his anything. We're just trying to stay alive." Corin chuckled, leaning back in his chair. "Fair enough. So, what kind of trouble are you in this time?" "The kind that starts with slavers and ends with bounty hunters," Donovan said, his tone serious. "We need to disappear for a while. Got any leads?" Corin's grin faded, replaced by a calculating look. "That's a tall order, and not cheap." "I've got credits," Donovan said, though the weight of those words sat heavily in his chest. Spending what little he had left was a gamble, but they didn't have much choice. Corin rubbed his chin, glancing at Kayla again. "All right. I might know a place. Remote, out of the way. No one will bother you unless you give them a reason. But you're gonna owe me for this, Donovan. Big time." "I already owe you," Donovan said with a smirk. "True," Corin said with a chuckle. "Consider this adding interest." He handed over a data chip, his expression turning serious. "Be careful, though. Places like this? They're quiet for a reason. Stick to yourselves, and don't trust anyone." Donovan nodded, slipping the chip into his pocket. "Thanks, Corin. I owe you one." As they left the cantina, Kayla glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "You really trust him?" "Not even a little," Donovan said with a grin. "But he's good at what he does, and right now that's all that matters." Kayla shook her head, but there was a faint smile on her lips. For the first time since they'd met, she seemed almost relaxed. It was a small victory, but Donovan would take it. The station receded into the void behind them as Donovan and Kayla set a course for the coordinates Corin had provided. The destination was a barely charted planet on the edge of known space, a place Corin had described as quiet, but not too quiet. Donovan wasn't entirely sure what that meant, but they didn't have the luxury of second-guessing. Kayla sat in the co-pilot's seat, her posture more at ease than before. She still kept a wary eye on the ship's scanners, but the tension that had radiated off her earlier seemed to have lessened. Donovan stole a glance at her, wondering what it would take to get her to truly trust him. "You keep staring at me like that, and I'll start charging you," Kayla said without looking. Up from the console, Donovan smirked, caught off guard. "Sorry, just trying to figure you out." "Good luck with that," she replied, her lips twitching into a faint smile. He leaned back in his chair, stretching his legs. "You know, you could tell me about yourself. Make my life easier." Kayla tilted her head, considering. "What do you want to know? Where you're from? What your life was like before? All this." She hesitated, her expression turning guarded. "My life wasn't exactly a fairy tale. My people, Zyrians, we were known for our connection to the stars, for our ability to navigate the cosmos without maps or instruments. That's what made us valuable." "Valuable how?" Donovan asked, his voice softening. "To everyone, but ourselves," she said bitterly. "We were peaceful, unarmed, easy prey. The syndicates realized they could use us, sell us, force us to guide their ships. That's how I ended up on that market. A tool for someone else's gain." Donovan's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry." She looked at him, her golden eyes searching his face. "It's not your fault, but you asked, so there it is. My life, neatly summarized." "Well, for what it's worth," he said, meeting her gaze. "You're free now, and I'll do everything I can to keep it that way." Kayla didn't reply, but the faintest flicker of something, gratitude, hope, crossed her face before she turned back to the console. The ship's comm system beeped, interrupting the moment. Donovan leaned forward, scanning the incoming data. "Looks like we're almost there. Dropping out of hyperspace in 3, 2, 1. The stars elongated into streaks, then snapped back into pinpoints as the ship emerged from hyperspace. Before them lay a green and blue planet, its surface dotted with lush forests and shimmering oceans. It looked untouched, almost idyllic. "Not bad," Donovan said, guiding the ship toward the atmosphere. "Maybe Corin actually did us a favor, for once." "Let's not get ahead of ourselves," Kayla said, though her tone was lighter than usual. They touched down in a clearing surrounded by towering trees, the air thick with the scent of vegetation and the hum of alien wildlife. Donovan powered down the ship and leaned back with a satisfied sigh. "Welcome to paradise," he said, unbuckling his harness. "Or at least, as close as we're gonna get." Kayla followed him down the ramp. "It's beautiful," she admitted, her voice soft. "See? Told you I'd deliver," Donovan said, grinning. She rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. Instead, she crouched down, running her fingers through the soft grass. For a moment, she looked completely at peace, the weight of her past seeming to lift just a little. "Come on," Donovan said, pulling a small device from his pocket. "Let's set up camp. If Corin's right, we'll need to keep a low profile." They worked together in companionable silence, setting up a basic shelter near the ship. Donovan couldn't help but notice how quick and efficient Kayla was, her movements precise and purposeful. She caught him watching and raised an eyebrow. "What?" she asked. "Nothing," he said quickly. "Just impressed." She smirked. "You should be. I've had a lot of practice surviving." "Hopefully, you won't need to practice much longer," he said. "Not here, anyway." Kayla's smile faded, replaced by a thoughtful look. "Do you really think we can stay here? That they won't find us?" "I don't know," Donovan admitted, his tone serious. "But we've got a chance, and that's more than we had yesterday." She nodded, her gaze distant. A chance. I suppose that's all anyone can ask for. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the forest in shades of orange and pink, they sat together by a small fire. For the first time since they'd met, the silence between them felt comfortable, even safe. "You never told me," Kayla said suddenly, her voice cutting through the quiet. "Told you what?" Donovan asked, glancing at her. "Why you're out here. Why you're not with your own people." He hesitated, staring into the flames. "Let's just say Earth and I didn't see eye to eye. I couldn't stay there, knowing how they treated anyone who wasn't human, so I left. Figured I could do more good out here than back home." Kayla studied him, her expression unreadable. "You're a strange man, Donovan." He chuckled. "I'll take that as a compliment." "Don't," she said, but there was a faint smile on her lips. As the fire crackled between them, Donovan felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Maybe, just maybe, they could make this work. The night wrapped around them like a quiet velvet curtain, broken only by the occasional chirp of alien wildlife and the crackle of their modest fire. Donovan leaned back on his elbows, staring up at the sky. The stars here were different, bolder, brighter, and scattered in unfamiliar constellations. It reminded him just how far from home he truly was. Kayla sat cross-legged across from him, her golden eyes reflecting the flickering light. She'd taken down her braids, and her hair cascaded over her shoulders in soft waves. Donovan thought she looked almost serene, a stark contrast to the guarded, tense woman he'd first met. "Do you miss it?" she asked suddenly, breaking the stillness. "Miss what?" Donovan replied, pulling his gaze from the stars to her. "Your home. Earth." He shrugged, a humorless chuckle escaping his lips. "Not really. Earth's not exactly a place you pine for when you're out here. Don't get me wrong, there's good people there. But the system? It's broken. People like me? We're better off staying gone." Kayla tilted her head, studying him. "And what kind of person are you, Donovan?" He grinned, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. "The kind who doesn't fit anywhere, I guess. Always sticking my nose where it doesn't belong, fighting battles I probably shouldn't." "That tracks," she said, smirking. "What about you?" he countered. "Do you miss your world?" Her expression darkened, and she looked away, her fingers toying with a blade of grass. "I miss what it was supposed to be, but the Zyrian homeworld is just ashes now. Missing it hurts too much." "I'm sorry," Donovan said quietly, meaning it. She looked at him then, her gaze piercing. "Stop apologizing for things you didn't do. You're not responsible for my pain." "Maybe not," he said, leaning forward. "But that doesn't mean I can't try to make it better." Kayla blinked, clearly unprepared for his response. Her lips parted as if she wanted to say something, but no words came. Instead, she shifted uncomfortably, glancing back at the fire. "You're relentless," she muttered, but there was no heat in her words. "It's a skill," he said with a grin, trying to lighten the mood. They sat in silence for a while, longer, the weight of their shared scars hanging in the air like a ghost. Finally, Kayla stood, brushing dirt from her legs. "We should rest," she said. "Tomorrow will be complicated." "Complicated how?" Donovan asked, raising an eyebrow. Kayla hesitated. "I've been running for a long time. Hiding isn't enough, Donovan. They always find you eventually. If we're going to stay here, we need to be ready for them." He frowned, standing as well. The determination in her voice surprised him, but he nodded. "You're right. If they come, we won't make it easy for them." Her gaze softened, and for a moment, she looked almost grateful. "Thank you." "Hey," he said, his tone lighter. "You're not in this alone anymore. That's got to count for something." Kayla's lips curved into a small, genuine smile. "Maybe it does." The next morning, The serenity of their temporary haven was shattered by the whine of an incoming transmission. Donovan bolted upright, grogginess forgotten as he reached for the ship's comm unit. Kayla was already there, her fingers flying across the console. "Who is it?" Donovan asked, peering over her shoulder. "Encrypted signal," she said, frowning. "Give me a second." The screen flickered, and Corin's face appeared, his expression uncharacteristically grim. "Corin," Donovan said, his voice tense. "What's going on?" "Trouble," Corin said without preamble. "The Syndicate's got a bounty on you both, big enough to attract some nasty players. You're not safe there." Kayla's hands clenched into fists, her jaw tightening. "How long do we have?" "Hard to say," Corin admitted. "But they'll come. That planet isn't as isolated as it looks. I can help, but you'll need to move fast." Donovan exchanged a look with Kayla. "What's the plan?" "There's a resistance cell not far from your position," Corin said. "They've got the resources to help you disappear for good." "I'll send the coordinates, but be careful. They don't trust outsiders." Kayla's expression hardened. "We can handle it." The transmission ended, leaving an ominous silence in its wake. Donovan exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Well, so much for paradise," he said. Kayla turned to him, her gaze steady. "Are you sure about this? Helping me means you're in this as much as I am. You could still walk away." Donovan stepped closer, his voice firm. "Not a chance. You're stuck with me, Kayla." She looked at him for a long moment, and something in her eyes softened. "Then let's not waste time." They packed up, quickly loading their supplies back onto the ship. As the engines roared to life, Donovan glanced over at Kayla in the co-pilot's seat. "Think this resistance will actually help us?" he asked. "They'll help me," she said. "You? That depends on how convincing you are." He grinned, despite the tension in the air. "Good thing I'm charming," Kayla snorted. "Let's hope that's enough." The ship lifted off, disappearing into the vast expanse of the unknown. The path ahead was uncertain, but Donovan knew one thing for sure. He wouldn't let Kayla face it alone. The ship soared through the atmosphere, the forested planet shrinking behind them. Donovan kept his hands steady on the controls while Kayla worked the scanners, her focus razor-sharp. The coordinates Corin had sent led to a region on the far side of the planet, a rocky expanse riddled with caverns and towering mesas. If the resistance was hiding out there, it made sense. The terrain was naturally defensible and hard to track. Donovan broke the silence. "So what are the odds this resistance doesn't shoot us the second we show up?" Kayla smirked, not looking up from her screen. "Higher than zero. Barely." "Comforting," Donovan said, rolling his eyes. "You've worked with them before?" "Once," she admitted. "They're not exactly team players, but if Corin thinks they'll help, we don't have much choice." "Great," Donovan said dryly. "Love relying on people who probably hate me on sight." Kayla shot him a sidelong glance, her lips twitching. "Don't take it personally. They hate everyone." "Charming," Donovan muttered, adjusting their course. The mountain range came into view, jagged peaks stretching into the clouds. He let out a low whistle. "Well, at least they've got a nice view." "Eyes on the landing," Kayla said, though her tone was more amused than stern. They descended into a narrow canyon, the ship's sensors pinging steadily as they neared the coordinates. Donovan spotted a flat outcropping of rock that looked stable enough for a landing and brought the ship down gently. The engines powered off with a low hum, leaving them in silence. Kayla was already strapping a blaster to her hip. She caught Donovan watching her and raised an eyebrow. "What? You're the one who said we might get shot." "Fair point," Donovan said, grabbing his own weapon. "Let's try not to make that a self-fulfilling prophecy." They disembarked, the heat of the canyon pressing down on them. The air was dry, carrying the faint scent of minerals and dust. Kayla led the way, her movements confident but cautious. The coordinates led them to the mouth of a cavern, its entrance partially obscured by jagged rocks. Kayla paused, scanning the area with a handheld device. "Anything?" Donovan asked, his voice low. "Energy signatures," she said. "They're here." Before Donovan could respond, a voice echoed from the shadows. "That's far enough." He froze, his hand hovering near his blaster. Kayla didn't move, her expression calm. From the darkness emerged a group of figures, their weapons trained on the newcomers. They were a mix of species, their faces hard and their armor battered but functional. The one in front, a tall, scarred woman with piercing green eyes, stepped forward, her rifle steady. "State your business," she said, her voice cold. Kayla raised her hand slowly, her movements deliberate. "We're here on Corin's recommendation. He said you could help us." The woman's eyes narrowed. "Corin's word doesn't mean much out here. Why should we trust you?" "Because the syndicate's hunting us," Donovan said, stepping beside Kayla. "And if they find us, they'll find you too. We're on the same side, whether you like it or not." The woman's gaze flicked to him, her expression unreadable. She looked back at Kayla, studying her for a long moment. "You're Zirian," the woman said. "A navigator?" Kayla nodded. "I was." The woman lowered her rifle slightly, though her stance remained wary. "Come with me. But if you so much as blink wrong, you're dead." "Friendly," Donovan muttered, as they followed her into the cavern. Kayla smirked. "I told you." The interior of the cavern was surprisingly well fortified. Tunnels branched off in every direction, lined with makeshift barricades and concealed turrets. The resistance had clearly been here a while, and they'd prepared for trouble. The woman led them to a central chamber, where a map of the region was projected in mid-air. Other resistance members milled about, their conversations hushed but intense. "I'm Zara," the woman said, turning to face them. "I run this cell. If you're here, you'll follow my rules. Understood?" "Crystal clear," Donovan said, offering a mock salute. Zara's glare could have melted steel. "Save the jokes, human. You're not welcome here." "Good thing I'm not here for a warm reception," he shot back, though his tone lacked malice. Kayla stepped between them, her voice calm but firm. "We don't want trouble, Zara. We just need help staying off the Syndicate's radar. Corin said you have resources we could use." Zara crossed her arms, her expression skeptical. "And what do we get in return?" "A navigator," Kayla said. "You won't find anyone better." "And me," Donovan added. "I'm good in a fight." Zara snorted. "You'd better be, because if you're lying, you won't live to regret it." "Understood," Kayla said, her voice steady. Zara studied them for another moment, then nodded. "Fine, you can stay, but don't think for a second that I trust you." As Zara walked away, Donovan let out a low breath. "Well, that went about as well as I expected." Kayla smirked. "Could have been worse. She didn't shoot you." "High bar," Donovan said dryly. Despite the tension, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were finally on the right track. For the first time since they'd fled the station, he felt like they might actually have a shot at surviving this. The days within the resistance base blurred into a tense rhythm of preparation and uneasy alliances. Zara kept Donovan and Kayla under constant scrutiny, her distrust as palpable as the heat in the cavern air. Kayla's role quickly became indispensable. Her knowledge of Zirian navigational systems helped optimize supply routes, and her sharp tactical mind earned reluctant respect from Zara's inner circle. Donovan, on the other hand, threw himself into combat drills and fortification efforts, earning wary nods from the soldiers who initially dismissed him as dead weight. But despite their progress, the tension between Zara and Donovan was a powder keg waiting for a spark. That spark came during a strategy meeting. The Syndicate's scouts have been spotted near the southern ridge, Zara said, stabbing a finger at the holographic map. We need to secure the choke points before they get any closer. We don't even know if they've found us, Donovan argued. You're talking about sending half your people into a potential ambush. And what would you suggest? Human, Zara snapped, her tone dripping with disdain. Sit here and wait to be slaughtered? No, Donovan shot back, leaning over the table. I'm suggesting we use the terrain to our advantage. Set traps, monitor their movements, and hit them on our terms. Zara's glare could have ignited the map. You don't get to give orders here. I'm not trying to give orders, Donovan said, his voice rising. I'm trying to keep your people alive. Enough, Kayla interjected, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. We don't have time for this. Zara, Donovan's right. We need to be smarter about this. Let him help. Zara's jaw tightened, but after a long, simmering moment, she nodded curtly. Fine. But if this goes wrong, it's on both of you. Donovan exhaled as Zara stalked out, the other resistance members trailing after her. He turned to Kayla, his shoulders sagging. Thanks for the assist. Kayla smirked. Don't get used to it. You're still a pain in the ass. Fair, he said, grinning despite himself. They spent the next 2 days preparing the canyon for what they all knew was inevitable. Donovan worked alongside the resistance fighters, setting up traps and choke points while Kayla coordinated reconnaissance efforts. Their partnership was seamless, each complementing the other's strengths. One night, as they took a rare moment to rest by the fire, Donovan glanced at Kayla. You ever think about what comes next? After all this? Kayla looked at him, her expression guarded. I've spent so long running, I don't know how to think beyond surviving. You should, he said, his tone gentle, because surviving isn't living. She studied him for a moment, her gaze searching. And, what about you? What do you want? He hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Finally, he said, to stop running, to build something worth sticking around for. Kayla's lips curved into a faint smile. Maybe that's not such a bad idea. Their moment of quiet was shattered by the sound of an alarm. Donovan was on his feet instantly, Kayla right behind him as they raced to the command center. Zara was already there, barking orders as the holographic map displayed multiple red blips moving toward their location. They found us, Zara said, her voice grim. We've got incoming, heavily armed, and they're not here to negotiate. Donovan's stomach sank as he counted the blips. That's a full strike team. They're not just scouting anymore, they want to wipe you out. Then we make our stand, Zara said, her eyes blazing. The base erupted into chaos as the resistance prepared for the attack. Donovan and Kayla moved through the chaos with purpose, coordinating defenses and rallying the fighters. As the Syndicate forces closed in, Donovan felt a surge of determination. For the first time in years, he wasn't just fighting to survive, he was fighting for something bigger than himself. The first wave of Syndicate soldiers hit the outer defenses, triggering a series of explosions that lit up the night. Donovan took up position near the front lines, his blaster steady as he fired at the advancing enemies. Kayla stayed further back, her sharp commands ensuring the resistance fighters held their ground. The battle was brutal and relentless, the Syndicate forces pushing harder with every wave. But the resistance fought back with everything they had, refusing to give an inch. In the chaos, Donovan caught sight of Kayla, her golden eyes blazing as she took down an enemy with precision. Despite the danger, she moved with a grace and confidence that took his breath away. And in that moment, he realized something that hit him like a punch to the gut. He didn't just care about Kayla, he was falling for her. But there was no time to dwell on it. The Syndicate wasn't done, and the battle was far from over. The fight stretched on for hours, the air thick with smoke and the acrid scent of blaster fire. The once quiet canyon was now a war zone, every corner of the base echoing with the sounds of explosions and gunfire. Donovan's muscles screamed with exhaustion, but he refused to stop. Each time the syndicate advanced, he pushed forward, determined not to let them take this place. Not now, not after everything they'd built. Kayla's presence was a constant, her sharp eyes scanning the battlefield as she barked orders to the scattered fighters. Donovan caught glimpses of her between shots, her movements fluid, efficient. Every now and then, their eyes met across the chaos, and for a brief second, the world seemed to still around them. Then the world snapped back into focus as the syndicate surged forward again, this time with a new strategy. Their armored forces breached the outer defenses, pushing through the resistance's barricades. Donovan's heart pounded in his chest as he sprinted to meet the new threat, his blaster raised. "Get to the inner perimeter!" he shouted, his voice barely cutting through the noise. "We can't let them break through here." He heard Kayla's voice through his earpiece. "I'm on it. Hold them off as long as you can." Donovan didn't need to be told twice. He dove into the fray, his blaster fire precise as he picked off enemy soldiers one by one. But they just kept coming, more and more of them flooding in, the resistance's numbers thinning with every wave. Then, a blast hit. Too close. Donovan stumbled back, the force of the explosion knocking him to the ground. His vision blurred for a moment as he fought to regain his bearings. He pushed himself up, but the moment he did, a sharp pain shot through his side. He gritted his teeth and staggered forward, refusing to fall. His comm crackled in his ear. "Donovan, you need to pull back, now." It was Kayla's voice, but it sounded distant, almost muted, like she was shouting from the other side of the world. His vision flickered as he tried to focus, but the pain was sharp, relentless. He couldn't let it slow him down, not now. "I'm not leaving," he grunted, pushing through the pain and firing once more. He could feel the weight of his decision sinking in as the battle raged around him. But he couldn't stop. Not when they were this close to holding their ground. Not when Kayla was still out there fighting just as hard as he was. Then he heard it. A scream. A cry that cut through the din of the battle and sent ice through his veins. Kayla. His heart skipped a beat as he turned, his eyes scanning the battlefield. And there she was, her back to him, fighting off a syndicate soldier who had gotten too close. But before Donovan could react, another figure appeared from the shadows, a dark shape moving with the stealth of a predator. Kayla didn't see it until it was too late. A sharp crack filled the air as a blade sliced through the air and embedded itself in her side. Her eyes widened, and she gasped, stumbling back as the soldier pushed the blade deeper, his grip on her tightening. "Kayla!" Donovan's voice cracked as he charged forward, every muscle in his body screaming with desperation. He reached them just as the syndicate soldier raised his weapon for a killing blow. Donovan's blaster fired, hitting the soldier square in the chest. The man collapsed, but not before he swung his blade once more, slashing through Kayla's armor. Donovan knelt beside her, his breath ragged as he pulled her into his arms. "Kayla, hey, stay with me." Kayla's eyes fluttered as she winced in pain, her hand weakly pressing against the wound. "Didn't think you'd care," she whispered, a faint smile tugging at her lips, though the pain in her voice was undeniable. "Shut up," Donovan said, his voice tight. "You're not dying on me. Not now." Her eyes searched his face, her expression softening. "You're not bad, Donovan, for a human." He couldn't help but laugh, though it was hollow. "You're not so bad yourself." He turned his head, his heart pounding in his chest. "We need a medic now." The shout barely left his mouth before Zara appeared at his side, her face a mixture of fury and concern. She quickly assessed Kayla's injury, pulling out a medkit from her belt and beginning to work. "We've got her," Zara said, her voice low but firm. "But we need to move fast." Donovan nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from Kayla. She was barely conscious, her breathing shallow. "I won't let her die, Zara. I won't." Zara's gaze softened for just a moment. "We're all fighting for something, Donovan. Let's make sure it's not in vain." The medics arrived quickly, taking Kayla away as Donovan stood, his fists clenched. He wasn't sure whether it was anger, fear, or something else entirely, but the weight of the moment crushed him. Kayla was alive, but how much longer could they keep surviving in this war? The battle was far from over, but it had already cost them more than Donovan was willing to bear. The war dragged on, each day more grueling than the last. The resistance had pushed the syndicate back time and again, but it was becoming clear that they couldn't keep up the fight forever. Their numbers were dwindling, their resources running low, and the syndicate was relentless. But there was a fire in the resistance that couldn't be extinguished, not while Donovan and Kayla still breathed. Kayla had recovered, but not without scars. Physically, she was healing, thanks to the medics who had worked tirelessly to save her. But emotionally, the toll was heavier. She was quieter now, more introspective, as if the blade that had nearly taken her life had also pierced something deeper inside her. Donovan watched her closely, silently, always there to offer a steady hand when the weight of it all became too much. It wasn't long before their bond grew, a connection that had started with survival now forged in the fires of war. They fought side by side, moved with purpose, their relationship deepening as they shared more than just the battlefield. There were stolen moments of tenderness in between the chaos, laughter in the midst of the bloodshed, and even fleeting whispers of something more, something that couldn't be ignored any longer. One evening, as the last remnants of daylight dipped below the horizon, Kayla found Donovan by the fire, his back to her, as he stared into the flames. She hesitated for a moment, her breath caught in her throat, before walking over and sitting beside him. "Can I ask you something?" she asked softly, her voice barely rising above the crackling of the fire. Donovan turned his head, offering her a small smile. "Sure, anything." She met his gaze, her golden eyes unwavering, searching for something in his face that she hadn't quite found before. "Why are you still here?" His smile faded slightly, but his gaze remained steady. "Because I don't have anywhere else to be." Kayla tilted her head, her eyes softening as she leaned slightly closer. "What about after all of this? If we win, what then?" Donovan's expression softened, his fingers tracing the edge of his blaster absent-mindedly. "Then we rebuild," he said, his voice low. "We build something worth sticking around for." She was quiet for a long moment, considering his words. "You think we'll make it through this?" "I do," he replied, his voice steady, despite the uncertainty that gnawed at him. "Because we're not fighting for just survival anymore. We're fighting for the future, for a chance to have something real." Kayla smiled faintly, her eyes glistening in the dim firelight. "You've always been more of an optimist than you let on." Donovan chuckled, a warm, genuine sound that felt like a weight lifting off his chest. "I guess you'll just have to get used to it." Her smile lingered, but there was something deeper in her eyes now, a trust that had been earned through shared struggle and sacrifice. Without another word, she leaned in, brushing her lips softly against his. Donovan stiffened for a moment, surprised by the tenderness of it. But then he kissed her back, slow and sure, as if the world had stopped spinning just for them. The war was still raging, the future uncertain, but in that moment, everything else faded away. There was only them, only the quiet promise of something beyond the fight, beyond the bloodshed. Zara had warned them not to get distracted by emotions, not to let love cloud their focus. But as the kiss deepened, Donovan realized. She had been wrong. Love didn't weaken them. It made them stronger. It gave them something worth fighting for, something worth dying for. And when the final decisive battle came, when the Syndicate sent everything they had left, it wasn't just the Resistance's tactics or weapons that held them together. It was the resolve in each of their hearts, the fire of hope that had been kindled in the darkest hours. In the end, they won. Not because they were the strongest, but because they fought with everything they had, and when the dust settled, it wasn't just the Syndicate that had fallen. It was the beginning of a new era. The Resistance's victory wasn't just a conquest of space. It was a triumph of love, of humanity, of the will to fight for something more than survival. Donovan stood beside Kayla, their hands entwined, watching the first light of a new dawn rise over the horizon. The war was over. They were free, and the future, with all its possibilities, was theirs. "I'm glad you stayed," Kayla said softly, her voice filled with quiet certainty. "Me too," Donovan replied, squeezing her hand. "Me too." And with that, they turned toward the future, ready to build a world of their own. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more thrilling sci-fi tales.